It's finally time! It's time to read the Stormlight Archive. Um, so, you may notice that I'm wearing the same shirt as I was wearing in the final Warbreaker video. That's because I lied in that video. By the time I recorded that video, I had already finished reading the first part of Way of Kings, so I'm recording this immediately after that video. Um, so, Way of Kings, finally getting to what is considered by many to be one of the best fantasy books of the 21st century. Um, so, a little bit of background. Going into this, I knew basically nothing about the plot of this book. I knew a couple of things. I knew that there were going to be big storms that play a role in this. Um, I knew that the main characters, which I still don't actually know if this is true or if there are more than this, but the three main characters who I have heard people talk about are Kaladin, Shallan, and Dalinar. I knew Kaladin was a slave. I knew he uses a spear. I knew he's supposedly a very sad character. And I knew he had like a little Navi fairy. I didn't know anything else going in. Now, of course, I've met Syl, so I know that that's Syl. I knew that Shallan exists and has red hair and is maybe a scholar. Turns out I was right about that. And I know nothing about Dalinar except that he's a general. And now, having read the first part of the book, I also know that he's the brother of the dead king, because he was in the prologue. But Dalinar hasn't actually shown up in the book yet, so I don't actually know anything more about him other than the fact that he's a general. And that people seem to think he's one of Sanderson's best characters, so I'm looking forward to that. But that's about it as far as what I knew about this series overall going in. The only other thing I knew is that this series is like the center of the Cosmere, like the beating heart of the Cosmere, as it were, and that this is where the disparate threads from other Cosmere books sort of come together. So, like I said, looking forward to that. Now, let's talk about this book, though. the actual, or rather, not the book, but the part one of the book, the part that I've actually read. This is definitely the strongest beginning that any Sanderson book has had. I have basically no criticisms of anything here. Sanderson's prose has been elevated to a level that he has not expressed so far, which is good. He's growing as a writer. The world building and the unique ideas of this setting are more unique and more vibrant and more interesting and intriguing than really, I would say, most books I've ever read. I'm fascinated by the setting. The character work is very strong on both Shallan and Kaladin, which I am very, very pleased to say immediately after reading Warbreaker, where I had an issue, which is that the characters didn't feel fully fleshed out enough. Here, in just this short part at the beginning, I can already say that Kaladin and Shallan are very well fleshed out characters, which is important for a character-driven book, which I feel like this is. And I say it's a character-driven book because there's no plot yet. Like, there's plot for Shallan and plot for Kaladin, but there is not even really a hint of an actual main plot for the Stormlight Archive yet, which is not a criticism. I think that's great. I think it's good when a story is written in such a way that it's really difficult to blurb it. By this point in Mistborn or Warbreaker or Elantris, I feel like I would have been able to give like a 1 to 2 sentence spoiler free blurb of what the story is about. I definitely cannot do that right now about Stormlight Archive or Way of Kings specifically. Um, which, like I said, I really like. I'm enjoying that so far. I'm enjoying sort of the anticipation of waiting to see what this book is going to be about. Um, what is the titular Stormlight Archive? Is it the archive in Kharbranth where Shallan goes? Probably not, but we'll see. Um, so yeah, so I can't really. As a result, I can't really predict much about the future. I guess I can try to predict something about Shallan and Kaladin. Um, just based on genre tropes, I am guessing that Shallan won't manage to steal the. What was it called? Was it the Voidcaster? She won't manage to steal the bracelet thing from Jasna. Maybe not. Certainly not until the end of this book, I would predict. Um, and maybe not even then. And instead, she will just become an actual scholar. That's my prediction. Um, Kaladin, I'm guessing he's going to whip Bridge 4 into shape, make them a perhaps even fighting force, maybe take them out into the field and earn his freedom back that way. That would be interesting. I don't know what's going on with Syl. Yeah, man, the more I think about it, the more I realize I have no idea how to predict where this book is going. Um, so I'm not going to. I'm going to leave Kaladin and Shallan where with that. I'm not going to say anything more about those two. I'm going to talk about some of the other stuff in this book that's sort of. By the way, this I've read not just part 1, but also the 3 interlude chapters between part 1 and part 2. From the perspective of the fisherman from the Purelake, one of Shallan's brothers, and Seth. So just so you know where I'm at. So Seth is probably the most intriguing character so far. I find the concept of what is it called? What are they called? God, I can't remember the name. But the thing that Seth is, like his title, sinless? No, not sinless. Something less. Anyway, I find the concept of that to be really interesting. The concept of like sort of someone who is honor bound to serve, but they're not honor bound to serve anyone in particular. They just like serve in general. Like they can, whoever happens to come across them, they have to serve them, which is interesting. Or rather, whoever happens to come across their stone. So I'm curious to see if Seth eventually grows to become like an actual protagonist of this story, like a major character. I'm also fascinated by the Purelake. The Purelake felt like a one-off place to visit that we might not ever see again, which I would be kind of disappointed by, because the Purelake is one of the best realized and most interesting settings I've ever seen in such a short chapter. It's like a 10-minute chapter, and in that short chapter, I feel like I got a complete holistic picture of the culture of the Purelake, the way of life there, the personality of the character whose perspective I was seeing it through, everything. I particularly love the detail that they have 2 gods, and one of them is their actual god who they worship. but they pretend that they worship the other one instead so he doesn't get jealous. That is delightful and one of the best bits of world building I've ever heard. I want to live in the Purelake. It sounds amazing. Um, what else? The setting in general is very unique and interesting. As far as I can tell, there isn't really soil anywhere. Like everything is just rock, which might have something to do with the storms. I'm guessing the storms just kind of washed off and blew away any soil that might have been there. So the fact that everything is stone, the fact that most of the fauna appears to be crustacean, um, all of that I find very compelling and interesting, and it makes the world feel different and alien. I'm sort of reminded of Morrowind, really. Like the vibe I get from the setting is very Morrowindy, which I love. Morrowind is one of my favorite settings. Um, There was also another really unique moment here that I really liked. I'm sort of jumping all over the place because, like I said, I don't really have a central thread to talk about, so I'm just talking about everything in no particular order. Seth writing Gavilar's final message in Gavilar's own blood, like leaving it as basically like faking the idea that Gavilar wrote it in his own blood. Um, is really interesting because I've never seen that done before. Like, whenever in a show or a movie or a book, whenever someone dies and they leave a message written in their own blood, either they actually left the message or their killer left the message as a means to, like, mislead or trick investigators or whatever. But here, the killer is the one leaving the message, but he's leaving the message because the dead person wanted it left. I don't know why that struck me as such a neat idea for a story beat, but it did. I was just like while I was reading that, I was like, oh, that's so cool. That's neat. I've never seen that before. So that was nice. Um, what else can I say about the setting? Yeah, I really enjoy that this setting appears to not be afraid to have diversity, but not just diversity in the sense that we think about it in the real world, but diversity in the sense that there are fantastical species here. What we, in my opinion, wrongly call races in the fantasy genre usually. Um, so the the I guess main antagonists of the story so far are the Parshendi, who are not described in great detail, but what is described is enough to make it clear that they are not human, like they are a very different race, and they also don't sound like they're really similar to any other fantasy race I've seen. So I'm very curious to see more of them. Um, and there are also the Thalans, who are, I think, supposed to be humans, but humans with really specific, like, biological characteristics. They have really long white eyebrows, which I find interesting. Um, and, um, and the Alethi are also described as sometimes having yellow eyes. The whole light eyes, dark eyes thing, I'm still not entirely clear on it. I'm not clear how hereditary that is. Um, because in the real world, you can't really count that if you have light eyes, your children will, or dark eyes, your children will. Like, it's likely, but you can't count on it. So I'm curious to see if this is a setting where the genetics of eye color are much more set in stone, or if there's something more interesting going on here, where maybe dark-eyed children can be born to light-eyed parents, or light-eyed children to dark-eyed parents, and then the children end up in a different class position than their parents. Can you be adopted into a light eyes family or a dark eyes family? I'm curious to see how that's handled, or if it's handled at all, or if it's just hand waved away, which would also be fine. It's fantasy. Um, The other thing I noticed about the setting is that the setting is far more brutal and cruel. Um, I guess the word would be like there's a stark, uncompromising cruelty to the setting that other Sanderson books haven't quite nailed. Um, Mistborn is obviously cruel, a cruel and horrific setting, but it is cruel and horrific in like a cartoonish Dark Lord kind of way. Like, oh, there's the Lord Ruler who rules the final empire from his fortress, which has an ominous name. What was it called again? It had a ridiculous name. It sounded like Barad-dûr. It was ridiculous. Um, and that's fine. Like it's fantasy, that's fine. But it's the fact that it was such like cartoonish, over the top fantasy evil, kind of dulled the sting of the oppression and the horror of the actual society that was being depicted. Um, and I think that maybe helped Sanderson kind of forget about the horror by the time he got to the third book, because by the time he got to the third book, he was kind of doing weird apologia for the Lord Ruler. I talked about that at length in my Hero of Ages videos, so I'm not going to get into it here. But here in this book, what we have is a mundanely, banally evil and cruel society. A society which is every bit as dehumanizing, oppressive, and horrific as the society in Mistborn, but it is all of those things with a human face. It does all of that casually. It is banal. It is everyday. It is not treated as extraordinary evil. It is normal, everyday, horrific oppression. And I enjoy that. I think it's a more realistic portrayal, more in line with, Hannah Arendt, banality of evil, and all that. Was that the phrase she used? Whatever. So yeah, I definitely think that's a better approach, one I enjoy more than the over-the-top evil of something like Mistborn. That being said, though, based on all three of the Cosmere stories I've read so far, so Elantris, Mistborn Era 1, and Warbreaker, Sanderson doesn't have the best track record of handling class super well. Like, it's not bad, but it's not very nuanced or interesting or let's say, theoretically founded. It's very shallow and surface level class analysis usually. So I am hopeful about this book maybe changing that, but I'm not holding out hope. Like I have a little bit of hope for it, but I'm mostly expecting that he won't do much interesting with that particular element. Which is fine. By this point I definitely don't expect it. So I won't be disappointed if he doesn't. But I would be very, very thrilled if he did. Yeah, this video is already getting a bit long, so I'm going to just quickly talk about a few other details. Let's see. The gender roles. The gender roles are very interesting and unique. I enjoy the idea of science and reading and writing and really all intellectual pursuits being feminine coded. That's different than our world, so I enjoy that. But much like all of Sanderson's books so far, there is very much there are certain things which he cannot get over when it comes to gender division. So far we have had 4 massively different fantastical settings, which have nothing in common with each other socially or culturally, and nothing in common with the real world socially or culturally. And yet in all 4 of them, for example, women wear dresses, men wear pants. Like that seems to be something that Sanderson treats as a universal truth of humanity rather than a social fact. Um, in all four of them, men are considered warriors and rulers and politicians more so than women. Again, something he seems to consider a, a universal social fact. So these things that Sanderson essentially takes for granted, the things that he doesn't feel like he should or could question in his works, these are sort of the things that I'm most interested in a fantasy book, actually. That's probably what my PhD is going to be about, actually. While it is annoying that he does that, it is also good for me because it gives me something to think about and maybe write about one day. Because that is something I'm really interested in, sort of the unspoken implicit biases that we as authors bring to the books that we write, especially in fantasy and other speculative fiction genres. So I'm going to be on the lookout for that going forward. I'm going to see if there are maybe societies where the gender roles aren't quite as stereotypical. What else can I even say here? Yeah, so one thing I know about this book going in, this series rather, is that there's going to be a lot of flashbacks. We've already had one from Kaladin, but there's going to be a lot of flashbacks sort of telling the backstory of of the main characters, and I can already tell that both Kaladin and Shallan have, like, layers upon layers upon layers of secrets in their backstories that are presumably going to be revealed over time, over the course of the series. Which is an approach I like when it's handled well, and so far here it's handled well. What I mean by that is, we the readers don't feel like we don't know the characters properly. Like, we know Kaladin and Shallan. The fact that we don't know these secrets about their backstories doesn't make it feel like we don't know them while we're reading about them, and that's good. Because we should feel like we know our main characters while we're reading about them. So as a result, rather than being annoyed by the secrets being kept, I am excited by them. So that's very well handled. And the final thing I want to talk about is the Cosmere connection. So I am guessing the vibe I'm getting so far from the Cosmere books, this is going to be sort of vague spoilers about the other Cosmere books, I guess, that I've read, but very vague. The vague vibe I'm getting is that the way these worlds are connected is through their gods. Like, there might be different sort of divine entities on each of these worlds, but these divine entities might have something in common. My first thought is that they might be the heralds we meet at the beginning of this section, at the end, the prologue of the book. I don't know if that's true. Like Kalak, Jezrien, Talonel, etc. It might be them, or those guys might be something specific to this setting. I don't know yet, so I'm not going to speculate too much on that. I'm just going to say that I'm keeping my eyes open and paying attention to see if I catch a whiff of that connection. Like that divine connection with the other Cosmere worlds. The other thing that I noticed, and this is also maybe the biggest hint towards the main story here, is at the beginning of the book, like literally on the first page, as soon as you open the ebook, the first page is this lovely drawing of 3 robed figures looking out through a window, and instead of heads, they have these like fractal squiggles floating above their shoulders. And that obviously was a very striking visual. And then when I was reading the book, I noticed that each chapter begins with this little paragraph, and the paragraphs seem to be, I think, people's final words. Like, someone seems to be collecting the final words or final thoughts of people on their deathbeds. And one of them is the following: I'm dying, aren't I? Healer, why do you take my blood? Who is that beside you with his head of lines? I can see a distant sun, dark and cold, shining in a black sky. So, I'm guessing that the figure with the head of lines is going to be very important in this story, because we have him on that picture right at the start of the book, and now he's mentioned here very ominously. That's all I can say about that, really, because I don't know where that's going. But that might be the divine entity of this setting, maybe, or at least one of them. And the other thing, of course, I noticed that connects to the Cosmere is Hoyd is here again, except he hasn't shown up yet. Here we have characters actually looking for him. So apparently there are more people who know about Hoyd than just Hoyd himself and his evil Sion? I need to reread that epilogue chapter from Elantris, actually. I've kind of forgotten some of the details, but he definitely had like an evil Sion, didn't he? Anyway, yeah, I'm hoping that Hoyd actually finally plays a major role in this book, and that I get to learn more about him, because who is he? What is he doing? I want to know already. It's been like, what, 5 books now? This is the 6th Cosmere book I'm reading. Come on, give me the Hoyd lore. I want to know it. So yeah, that's about it for my very disorganized thoughts on the first part of Way of Kings. I'm going to be reading the second part now, and I can already tell because I saw the first page of the second part, which helpfully lists the characters who are going to be featured in that part. I already know that Shallan will not apparently be in this part, and instead we'll finally get to meet Dalinar, and also someone named Adolin? I'm not sure about the gender there or the pronunciation or who that is, but apparently I was misinformed about the number of main characters, because apparently this part has a new one that I didn't know about, because I only thought this was going to be like Kaladin, Shallan, and Dalinar. So yeah, I'm very excited to keep reading this, because this is the most promising start to a Sanderson book yet. I'm hoping that this is as good, if not better, than Mistborn Era 1. And I really don't think it can be as bad as Elantris or Warbreaker, because this has such a good reputation compared to those books. So yeah, see you next week for Way of Kings Part 2. Ta-da!